Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. It's been a while. It's been a while, and part of that's due to busyness of life, and part of that's due to some technical issues on my end. The tech stuff isn't entirely worked out yet, but I hope to bring you some more regular content in the weeks to come. Where better to start than with one of our old standbys? Last month, I brought you a review of Vatican City Number 1 by Mark Millar and Per Berg. Per Berg being the actual name of the artist known as Narwhal. I've reviewed many of his books on this channel already, and I enjoy them a lot. So I was looking forward to seeing what he would do in this series with a little more star power to back him up. And I was not disappointed in the first book. But how is the second one faring? Well, to get it right out of the way, it is pretty good. It's the middle book of a 3-book series, and that's always a tricky place to be. You don't want to give away too much just yet, but you do have all of your key pieces set up, so you have to actually make some big moves without giving away what's actually going to happen at the end of the story. Furthermore, given the nature of this particular story and the supernatural elements involved, we need to get an idea of what the stakes are. We need to tell what the vampires are capable of, what the humans are capable of, and how it might all come together to bring this story to a resolution. Writing-wise, we get a lot of world building in this particular book. We get a sense of the vampires, their history, and what it is they want, and we get a sense of why what they want is in the Vatican City. Although we don't get a lot of specifics there. There's not a huge page count or word count for Millar to work with, so he's going to have to move very fast, which he does, and I don't have any complaints about. In terms of writing, I think the writing is very good. It delivers on what it needs to do. It shows both sides operating at a pretty high level, but most importantly, it establishes that Guido, our protagonist, has the skill set necessary to potentially pull a win out of this situation. But the odds are stacked against him to an extent where there may not be a good win. And even if he does win, a lot of people in the world are dead. And what is that going to mean for the world after they quote unquote win and beat all the vampires? Europe and the Americas are pretty much gone. That leaves some of the worst people in the world with an opportunity to fill the void. It's a very interesting setup, and Millar drops some pretty good hints at it. I think really this is about as good as the second act of a story can be as a standalone story. It doesn't have a whole lot of character development for anyone, but the plot is ready to really kick off in book 3, which is what you want out of a trilogy, I would think. Not even a trilogy, just a 3-book series. I don't think any one of these books really stands very well as a standalone story. It's not like a movie trilogy in that sense, but as a 3-act story, each act seems to be functioning pretty well. We're going to have to see how the third act comes off to really judge this story, but Millar's technical writing is excellent, as you would expect from him at this point in his career. Now, in my last video, I noted that you have to be a member of the Swiss Armed Forces to serve in the Swiss Guard in the Vatican. And I thought it was strange that Guido said he was a local and thus obviously Italian. But in this book, we get, I don't know if it's a retcon or just an added bit of world building, where he says at one point he served in the Swiss Air Force, and thus he'll be able to fly a plane that they discuss acquiring as part of this setup for the final act. I think it's a bit odd that an Italian man with an Italian name would be serving in the Swiss Air Force, but I think as just a hand wave to establish how he could qualify to serve in the Swiss Guard, this is about as good as anything we're going to get. And since I did talk a little bit about that in my last review, I thought it was worth pointing out that, hey, there is this detail that's added that makes it make a little more sense. So I think I'm going to forgive Millar for that. Obviously, he was thinking about it, and he just wanted this, local protagonist. And I think that's fine. I think it works pretty well. And honestly, how many people knew you had to be Swiss to serve in the Swiss Guard anyway? If you don't collect a lot of, random factoids about medieval mercenaries and, their successor organizations in the modern day, you probably missed that entirely. So it works pretty well. In this volume, we continue to see Narwhal knocking it out of the park with his illustrations. I know I said in the last one that he has really evolved, but what really struck me in this one is how perfectly suited I think his story is for this kind of story. His style of illustration is low on details, which I know is going to annoy some people. But when you are showing a story that is so violent as this story is, you run a risk, actually, of the violence becoming cartoonish. You can see that in like the Mortal Kombat franchise. Yes, in theory, those games are hyper violent, but it's hard to take the violence seriously when it is so slapstick. And whenever somebody does a vampire story, you run that risk of the violence going over the edge into the slapstick. And if that's what you're aiming for, that's fine. But Millar is obviously going for a very suspenseful and tense kind of a story here. Very fast moving, very how are they going to get out of this kind of a thing. And if you have this over the top slapstick gore in it, that would kind of detract from that mood. You'd have, I think, a little bit too much comedy killing the tension. But with Narwhal's very loose, very fluid, almost watercolor style, although the palette is not very watercolor, but that kind of impressionistic quality to it gives the violence a bit of a veil. And you know what they say about horror and your imagination, the more you let people fill in the blanks on their own, the worse it is. And seeing like the hyper violence and piles of bodies, not as hyper detailed, but just sort of as these silhouettes. You can tell what they are. You can tell that they are in pretty bad shape. I think this makes the scenes a lot more horrifying. And it kind of brings the mood back into that very tense atmosphere that Millar and Berg are trying to build in this book. It functions very well. And I think this is a great combination of art style with story. There are also some really great just scenes of underground spaces in this. And I commented on Narwhal's ability to draw buildings in the previous book. And I said it looked like he had just run very lightly over a picture and sketched it. But he can't have done that in this volume because there are these very fantastic underworld cityscapes, stairways and light fixtures and giant statues and this vampire goddess that is reigning over, legions of slaves. And it's all very sharp and evocative and really fitting to establish the threat of what will happen if Guido and the rest of Vatican City cannot outmaneuver these vampires. So great artwork, great art direction here. Wonderful illustrations of these underground spaces. I think with this kind of a story, we're actually seeing Narwhal developing, new ideas and skill sets in real time. It's very impressive. I'm really looking forward to book 3. I recommend this to anyone who loves this kind of cryptid horror or cryptid action. It's a good vampire story, but it's not really about a lot of modern vampire stories, which are focused on this sense of, power and seduction. This is more of a vampire story where it's grim, it's violent, and you have to fight back with everything you have, or you're going to get torn apart. That said, what I mentioned about price in my previous review still applies. This is a fairly expensive book at $6 a book. You are paying slightly above market price for page count, even from a mainstream publisher. That said, if it's in your niche, it is definitely worth every penny. And even if it's not in your niche, if you enjoy any kind of an action or suspense story, I would suggest checking it out if it comes out as a collection, because this is a really good story executing very well on very simple but fun ideas. If you get a chance to check it out, definitely do so. If you're interested in supporting me and what I do here, I would ask you to check out my book, which is available on Amazon. It's linked down in the video description. Have Spell Will Travel is a short, weird Western that covers a number of adventures of a spell-slinging mercenary by the name of Roy Harper in a West that never was. Let me know what you think of Vatican City if you've been following the series down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.